let me make you this point. The two shurim we just learned, yesterday's and today's, or 2 days ago and yesterday's, were this. The first point is Teira and Bria Yitzira Siyas Elakus, because it comes from Eir and Neshama. Everything else is Mislabash and Nefesh Ruach. Tanya had a very important point. The real reason Teira remains Eir and Neshama is because it's the Ein Sof of Atzilus which is coming into Bria. Mashenk and everything else. Since it's coming from Atzilus, it's Mislabash in Eir and Neshama and not in Eir Nefesh Ruach. Right? What would happen if Teira would go into Eir Nefesh Ruach? What would happen? Huh? You know, what would happen? Ein Nefesh Ruach is Nivra. It would be Ma'alim U'Master. So the whole Chiddush is that Torah comes into Bia and it's Mislabish Eir Neshama and it remains in Eir Neshama. Everything else comes into Bia and it goes in Nefesh Ruach. So far so good. You got the point? It says in Kabbalah exactly the opposite. When he does Kavana, when he's doing a mitzvah, Nasa Levushla in Neshama, becomes a garment for Neshama. V'idea Torah, when he learns Torah, it becomes Levush Ruach. The way you have to read it is Ruach, the Ruach, the Mishnah, the Yetzirah. The Ruach of Ruach to the Mishnah of Yetzirah. The Ruach, the Neshama, the Bria, the Agamara. Ruach, the Neshama, Bria, the Agamara. That's the Kash. We started off by saying that the whole Chiddush of Torah is that it comes into Bria and it remains Eir Neshama, and that's why it's godliness. But it says in Kabbalah that when Torah comes into Bria, it becomes Ruach. And if it's Ruach, that means say Torah becomes an Ivra. You understand the question? So he answers two answers. Huh? Levush, the Ruach, ay the Mishnah, the Yetzirah. The Ruach, the Neshama, the Bria. In other words, the Kol Se'el Ma'Yetzirah is Ruach. Kol Se'el Ma'Bria is Neshama. Kol Me'el Sasi is Nefesh. So this is the Ruach of Ruach in Yetzirah and the Ruach of Neshama in Bria. But it's Ruach, it's not Neshama. And therefore it should be Nivra and not Alakus. So he says two answers. Yeshleima, the answer number one is when Torah comes from the Eibishter down to earth, it's only Neshama. When we learn Torah, we're creating new Torah, so we're creating Torah in the Madrega of Ruach. Avodat Talmud Atzmei, as opposed to the Gemara itself, Shenitn B'Sinai, the way it comes from the top to the bottom, Hu B'Neshama, it's only in the Madrega of the Neshama. Therefore, the Eibishter gives the Torah on the level of Neshama, and when we learn it, we're Mavarer the Madrega of Ruach. V'chein b'Mishnah the Yetzirah, and the same is with Mishnah Yetzirah. So the first tenet is Torah the Eibishter gave is only Eir Neshama, because it's a lakus. We use the Torah to Mavarer Ruach, so we're in fact creating godliness in Ruach. That's tenet number one. Now goes tenet number two. V'afam Tim Tzalem. You could say differently. Shagama nitn b'Sinai u'Baruach the Yetzirah. You could say that there's also an idea Torah comes into the Ruach of Bria and Yetzirah, which is a very, very big problem. Because the whole pilpul we're having for these 3 pages is to make the case that Torah comes into Bia and remains a lakus because it's coming through the channel of Eir Neshama and it's really Chachmei Law, right? All the points that we made until now. But now he's saying that we could say that Torah comes into the Ruach. This is a very big chiddush. The tenet is as follows. Harineda, it's known, Shekol Malach, every Malach, who shliach Mulmaila, is a shliach from the Eibishter. Shehu shliach Mulmaila, why is the shliach from the Eibishter? Ozay Nikre B'Shem Hashem is called by the name of the Eibishter Mamish, Hashechem Bekibu, which rests inside of himself. Mash'ein Ken Kishein Shliach, as opposed to a Malach when he's not doing a shlichus. Yesh LeShem Acher, he has a totally different name, Kifi Avidas, as his job is. V'Ozay, and when he's not a shliach of the Eibishter, but he's Tamazay, a private Malach, Keiri Kodesh 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 Avayva Game, and he says to the Eibishter is home. Claim, in other words, when he's not in the middle of a shlichus, he claims Sheshem Havaya moved Lumena, the Eibishter separated from him. Even though B'Shas HaShlichus, he's called Shem Havaya. This is a word which is brought in Kamari Shainim in Chumash. There's 2 things, Nivraim, Malachim, and Sfiris. What's the difference between Malachim and Sfiris? Malachim and Nivraim. Sfiris are Lakus. Okay? In Bia, Sfiris are Neshama. Nivraim is Malachim. He's like this. You know, Malachim are Nivraim and not Lakus, but there's another thing you have to know about Malachim. That B'Shas HaShlichus he becomes a lakus. That's why Hagar's Malach said he's talking to Hagar as if he's the Eibishter. You know what I'm saying? The Malach is talking, he's speaking as if he's God. Why? Because during the Shlichus he becomes totally bottom. He's like Sfiris, and in Biyad that means Eir Neshama is always a lakus. Malachim are Nivrayim, but during the Shlichus they become bottle. So the Alter Rebbe is proposing, the distance says in Kislev Arizal, it is a slap to take in Ruach is very different than the slap to take in Neshama. The slap to take in Neshama is because Neshama is a lakus. The slap to take in Ruach is because Ruach is taka nivra. But while the Teira is mislabish in Ruach, the Ruach becomes the shliach of the Eibishter, bottled to the Eibishter, so Ruach can also carry Elikus, the way a Malach carries Elikus, but not the way a Sfira carries Elikus. Get the word? The Kasha is Ruach is Nivra. First of all, this is our creation. Second of all, B'shas, the Teira is mislabish in Ruach, for that, Nikude, Ruach becomes bottled, but otherwise Ruach is a Nivra. It's a third word. So the way you would summarize these three shiurim is the first shiur is Eira Neshama, the second shiur is Chachmei Lod B'Sabish Eira Neshama, and the third shiur is also when you have Teira in Ruach. And there's different ifanim how it works. Says the Rebbe, V'chein hu mamish, you can say exactly the same thing. Bebechinas is Lapshus, HaTalmud, Bebechinas Ruach, the Bria, V'Mishnah Beruach, the Yitzir. What it means that the Gemara goes into Ruach of Bria and the Mishnah Ruach of Yitzira. Even though we know the Ruach has niven out of Lakus, as the Torah says, Him Shluchi Hashem, the Shluchim of the Eibush are like Malach. A Malach is a niven, is not a Lakus. Okay? In other words, the Hainu, that while he is carrying the Torah, he becomes a Keli for a Shliach for Kelim, the Nukva, the Atzilus, Hachitzeinim beTalmud, V'emtoim beMishnah. It becomes the Kelim of Malchus of Atzilus. The outer Kelim of Malchus of Atzilus come the source of the Gemara. And the middle Kelim of Malchus of Atzilus are the source of the Mishnah. Asher Mishnah, Talmud, that Mishnah and the Gemara Shebehem Shachrim, which in them you have hidden or revealed me, say Dabe Chochma of Atzilus. Hamakabel Mechochmas Temah, the Aracham, which has inside of itself Keser of Atzilus. Shebei Melu B'Shein Sei Baruch Hu, which you have Mamash the Atmos of Elikus of Atzilus. And the Atmos of Elikus of Atzilus, which goes into Chochmas Temah, and goes into Chochmei Law, and goes into the Kelim of Atzilus, is mislavish in the Madregas of Ruach, of Bria and Yetzira. Ruach may be a Nivra, but while there's a slapchus of Teira in Ruach, the Ruach is but like a Malach, and therefore Elikus is Begil. V'nim, so this allows She'erin Sof, the Eibush is infinite light, who Shema Vaya, which is the name of the Eibush, Shechem Beruach, can reveal itself also in Ruach, the Bria Yetzira, Siyah B'Mikra, or Mishnah, the Talmud, in Chumash, and Mishnah, and Gemara. By the way, the Kashas, this, we don't understand Pshuta Shebek of this Tanya, but let's say we understood Pshat well, then Tzchangim gone to the Yukim, how come he only mentions Mishnah and Talmud? How come sometimes he only mentions Talmud? How come sometimes he mentions only Mishnah? How come now he mentions all three, Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud? How come sometimes he mentions Bria Yetzira? How come he mentions Bria Yetzira Asiyah? There's 1,001 diyukim over here about why he mentions, what he mentions, where he mentions it, and how he mentions it. But the bottom line is, this is the third Chiddush, that there could be a Teirah to Tzlabash and Ruach because of the bittul of Ruach, like a Malach. Ukisha Adam Laimit, Ukisha is the beginning of a line when he learns. Mam Shecheritzei Baruchu. He brings on the infinite light of the Eibishter Be'elam Hazeh into this world through these channels, through the channel of Eir Neshama, and perhaps also through the channel of Eir Ruach. Be'elam Hazeh in this world, Lias Nichlel Batal Be'edi Yisbarach, that the world should become included in Batal in Eibishter's light. Kizeh Kol Ab, that's why the Eibishter made people to bring Elikus down, like we had on top of Kufn and Zayin on the days. And the Kavanah is to bring down and not to lift up. Zog the Rebbe. This is why Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, who's holy was Pnimis of it, and the rest of the Rebbe learned Benigla, because the idea of learning Nigla, even though the Nigla is speaking about lower and Yonim, is Laham Shech Eire is Barach bringing the Eibish's great light, or Lavare Biruri Nega, and to create a clarity in the sparks of Nega called Meshach's Managolus during the duration of Golus, like it was discussed by Arichas Negez Kedesh Shimon Chaf. Vav, the Shal Teilon of the Tevara, it's a time when there's a ruling of a Teira that tolerates in the world. A Tevara, and when you learn Teira, you move out of Tevara in the world. Because what the Paul says, Ace, it's a time. Asher to Adam ba'Adam again. That Adam dilatata, Adam, bad Adam, rules over the good Adam, v'chuli. What's the end of the pasuk? Huh? Larale. Klipa thinks it's dominating Kedusha, but the only reason Klipa is dominating Kedusha is because Kedusha should be mavaded it. Kizehu tachas ha'ishtalshus, which is the ultimate purpose of the chain reaction of worlds. Sheyeda, that should descend, ha'elyon, the higher one, lamata to below. V'yilei did it, but Hashem should have a home in the lowest realms. Kedei lahaleison, to lift them up, and have echad vechad, they should become one with the Eibishter. So Neshamas Yisrael's Avedas to bring down. And part of the way of bringing down is the Birudim. And I suspect the reason he's mentioning Birudim is because the idea of Teira being Melubash and Ruach, but I'm not sure. Mashiach and Vedis HaMalach. Malachim are different. They don't have mitzvahs maisius, so they can't bring down Mahus of Kelim Datzilus. And they don't have Teir and a level of Allah either. So they can't bring down the Atmas of Elikus into Eir Neshama or to Eir Ruach, which is Mavada in the lower worlds. What is their business? The Chilu Rechim Usichliim. To use their Yir and Av, which comes from their Seichel. They don't bring anything down, only lifting up. and he uses the word histalkus. Now before, on Kuf Nun, Zayin and Beis, he used the word histalkus and aliyah. And when he used the word histalkus, he said chas v'sholem. I don't know if you remember. The difference between the word histalkus and aliyah, histalkus when the oil goes away without the kelim. Aliyah means when the oil goes up with the kelim. He's saying malachim, not only malachim are not bringing down, malachim don't even do aliyah. They don't even lift up kelim, they just have an infinite histalkus. Oh, but this explains Mashenivrai malachim yayin liyesh. And this is why when a yid, this is a whole different issue, which is l'chayda negeh to an earlier yid sakedesh. So a yid learns Torah shalei lishma. So we had this. You know we had this. Page Kuf Nun Daled Alf at the bottom. When a yid learns Torah shalei lishma, Kuf Nun Daled Alf, it says the first line, the al yedei Kuf Nun Dal. Yeah, what are you holding? Kuf Nun Aleph. Here, the Yedei Teira Shlei Lishma Nevroim Malachim Be'elam HaYetziru. Your Teira creates Malachim. L'chayda Teira is Alakus Nevroim Malachim HaNivra. Here. So now he answers. Yedei Zeka Teira Fil Shlei Bekavona. You create Malachim. Shu Bechinas Ruach Bovad. And l'chayda Malachim which are Ruach Ein Alakus are not godliness. And l'chayda Teira is godliness. And this is very simple. The answer is Sha'afa Pikein Shem Havaya Sheikh and Chuli V'dal. There's Shem Havaya also in Ruach, like he explained on this page, that a Malach will battle to the Yebish because Alakus is Beis Galsin. So although I don't know, I cannot say I gave you b'diuk the translation of each word of the last 3 pages. The Nekud of the last 3 pages explains how Teira could be Alakus and beyond, specifically Halacha. First of all, because of this concept called Eir HaNeshama, and specifically because Teira comes from the Eir Sof of Atzilus, which is Melubash Eir HaNeshama, and even the way it goes into Eir Ruach, it's because of the bittul of Malachim Talakus.